Wake up, buyer payer people. It's a beautiful day. Go grab yourself another cup of joe and say hello to Jim and Michelle Rhoads on the Buy Here Pay Here Morning Show. Take it away, you two.
Oh, good morning, everybody. Goodness. Yeah, we I don't know.
It's not a Monday.
It's not a Monday. But we're here. And really glad to be here. It's a cool topic we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah.
And we yesterday, before we get into announcements, yesterday we spent a little bit of time on our daily walk and listening to the Tote the Note broadcast that was done it was recorded a couple weeks ago. And we've been waiting for it to get through the Tote the Note broadcast with Steve Levine, talking about compliance and underwriting.
Yeah.
And so it was really fun we listened to the whole thing when we were on our walk, and we're like, oh my gosh. And it's funny when you record those things, you don't pick up on how many nuggets there are until you actually listen to it again and again and again. And there's so much stuff. So do we have any announcements before we kind of
Friday we have Jimmy Rambo from Spartan is going to join us to talk about collateral recovery rate. And then the Friday after that, we have Jeff Martin from NIEA
looking forward to that. I saw that he's going to be doing some stuff with the Car Guy Coffee guys too. And so, it looks like that he's enough acclimated that it's now time to start getting out there and talking to some of the different mediums to kind of just introduce himself as a new executive director.
Is that we have BHPH United start Sunday. I'm sure Mr. Levine will be there.
Yes.
And then the NEO Summit on Wednesday. So it's not too late to hop on a plane and get out there for that stuff on Sunday.
And we have been saying that we're going to be there, and we may not.
Right.
So just some family stuff has come up that
the NEO thing she means.
The NEO part of that. That was really pretty all that we were planning on attending. Because it's not about vendors. The Buyer Payer United it's about dealers, and it's about education for dealers. And so
and Hugo says, see y'all in Vegas. So there's a delay apparently. You might not see us in Vegas, Hugo.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
Yeah. So let me think here. Do I? I don't think I even need this in here. All right. Now can you hear us? Okay.
Welcome, Steve.
Yeah.
We've only been doing this for a year. We're still figuring stuff out here.
Oh yeah. Just it's it's one of these days we're gonna have have a person. A producer, someone that's here and that can go Michelle, stop pushing buttons. Oh, well. So welcome, Steve. We're so grateful that you could join us today and talk.
I'm so excited to be here. This is my first morning show. I've been doing this a long time. This is my first morning show, so I feel like I've hit the big time.
Yeah, right. That's kind of
stroking egos. It's there's a lot of other podcasts out there that have been there for a long time. It's
kind of a big deal, Steve. Yeah. We're up to 7 or 8 listeners now.
I know, right? It's fantastic. So again, we spent some time yesterday listening, and oh my goodness. We actually, Anna Maria Beck, who Digital Attention Online, who's our fractional marketing director, is the one that kind of did some of the work. And so she'd listened to all of it. She's been in the industry for a long time, decades. And she has been hounding us. When are you releasing that? When are you releasing that? When are you releasing that? Because it's good. Mm-hmm. It's got some really great information. And so I know she's bated breath. We told her as soon as we're done with the morning show, we're releasing it.
It's actually already.
I take no credit. Brent Carmichael was the star. He was the brains. I was else.
I think you need to listen to it again.
I think you need to listen to it again.
He's a smart guy, and he asked a lot of great questions. But what you shared in that was going to be really helpful to dealers. And we have it scheduled to go out at 10 o'clock Mountain Time, so noon Eastern today.
About a half an hour afterwards.
So it'll be released on YouTube today, and so
Wonderful.
People can tune in and find that. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So it's a ton of good stuff, Stephen. So we kind of queued up a couple of there's several kind of high points from that conversation. Let's well, first let me just talk to him a minute about the idea of the big topic of that was, how does a dealer, and keep in mind, I'm asking these questions partly as a former dealer and somebody who works inside the trenches with dealers often. And so I'm thinking, one of the things I love, and I said it inside the Tote the Note thing, is like, one of the things I enjoy about Buy Here, Pay Here is the flexibility and creativity piece, right? And so dealers are out there trying to be independent, create their own business. Yet I'm aware that one of the things I was thinking about, Steve, is, most of us have dealt with a bank where the bank says, I can't meet next week because I got regulators in all week, right? We've heard that, right?
Yep.
And so why does that happen? Like, why would regulators come in and pay a long visit to a bank? Well, we're a bank, right? As a Buy Here, Pay Here dealer. I mean, we don't have internal audits in the same way, but it's like this whole thing about, we love to be independent, but we have to recognize we are operating in a space where regulators, are going to want to see what we do. And so I think this whole conversation around underwriting to me was interesting. We grabbed some clips from that, but I just think for me, it's like, how do we help dealers have that flexibility that they enjoy and still be compliant? You talked about that. You want to share a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've worked with dealers a long time, and that they're entrepreneurs for a reason, that they want that independence. They want that flexibility. But at the same time, they also have folks to answer to, whether it's regulators or even their own banks or capital. That they've got to answer to them too. Usually, that the capital providers, when they enter into a relationship, they want to understand the underwriting policy. They want to see it in action, and they want to verify that it's there. So yes, there's flexibility within that box, but you do have to stick to some objective criteria, and that's what the regulators want to see too.
Yeah. And I know that, you talked about the thing, you can queue up the thing about the exception log. If I know you talked about the exception log and how people can go about, making those exceptions, because I want to talk about the thing. I know Brent pressed a little bit about this thing about policy versus guidelines, right? He was kind of looking for a softer, something with softer edges, than a policy maybe. And so
he was working me pretty good.
We have Brent here to talk, to speak for himself.
But I think in the end, we kind of resolved that, certainly for my satisfaction. And I think it was dealer listening.
I totally got where he was coming from, because, this is the beauty that I've seen of Buy Here, Pay Here, is that it just, he mentioned it depends. And that flexibility of being able to make things fit. To move things around to make things fit. So let's talk about the exception log.
Going back to this thing about flexibility, if I'm this Buy Here, Pay Here dealer out there in, Middletown, Pennsylvania or whatever, I'm trying to figure out, how can I look at the book and I see my guidelines and it says I'm trying to stick to 6 months on the job and certain credit profile, but I've got this person here who, maybe is an exception one way or the other. You would recommend that they proceed how, based on the checklist, so to speak, whether that's on a paper checklist or in a sophisticated software. They've got this guideline that they've created, this policy. How would you recommend they go about making those exceptions?
So I think the first thing that folks need to understand is exception logs are very important, that they could really save you if there's any sort of question down the road. And, I preach this to our clients, and it's always easier said than done, that they may develop good habits for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, but then inevitably the exception log kind of falls by the wayside. That's why one of the things that I encourage folks to do is I love quarterly compliance meetings. Anybody that's heard me speak has heard me talk about quarterly compliance meetings. One of the things you talk about in those meetings is, okay, let's break out the exception log. Are we making exceptions? What's the commonality for those exceptions?
Okay.
Do we need to change our policy because we're calling them exceptions, but apparently this is now part of our policy and we need to change our policy?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So I think you can let you comment about that, but I think that's why we grabbed that clip. Like, we think it's important to understand the policy part, and I don't want to forget. And watching the clip, I want to ask you before we wrap up today about your Nolan Ryan picture. Yeah.
Squirrel.
Yeah.
Jim does that too.
Yeah. So I can save mine for later.
Okay.
Yeah.
So exception policy.
Yeah.
Or exception log.
So yeah, this is something that I think is critical, and quite frankly, I think it's something that a lot of dealers struggle with, and that there's a lot of tension within organizations about it because the underwriters are busy. Keeping an exception log takes time. They don't always want to do it, but it becomes so important. And forget about regulators for a second, because most of the dealers, you're not going to have the regulator just show up at the doorstep unannounced. It's a lot more likely that in the next 6 months to a year, you're going to have an audit from your own lender, and this is going to come up. So you want to be able to explain if you've deviated from your policy. You want to be able to explain why, and it's important to take really good notes. A lot of times I'll see an exception log and they write down the customer name and the vehicle, but there's no explanation. And you really have to give some meat on the bone.
Yeah.
In my experience, dealers do the right thing when they make exceptions. That there's usually a really good reason behind it.
Uh-huh.
But if it's not written down, if it's not captured, it doesn't exist and you can't defend yourself.
Right. I think one of the more interesting parts for me was where you talked about this thing of making exceptions based on business practices, because I was kind of talking to Michelle yesterday about this idea that, when you're a buy here, pay your dealer and you create your program and you set up your shingle, so to speak, on the corner, and you say, this is my program, this is the way we do business. And I think the most extreme example for me was, if I'm a buy here, pay here loan originator, and I decide I only want to finance green cars, as some ridiculous example. You know what I mean? It's like, from a business practice standpoint, I only want to finance customers. And one of the other things that was interesting for me is radius. We touched on that a little bit, Steve, but one of the things I used to have in my own policy, and of course this is evolving as the industry changes, as the internet and digital shopping changes, then these things are shifting. But certainly as a dealer, I felt most comfortable if my customer lived or worked within a certain radius, as an example of a business practice. Could I make exceptions to that? Sure. But it certainly was a comfort level or a factor of security for me in my lending practices, if you will. So, as you talk about, you basically said you want dealers to have the flexibility to do their own business practices, right? They just need to write it in their policy.
Yeah, I think it's really important that everybody takes into account their own unique particular situation. And I think the policy has to match that. That cringe when dealers tell me, I got my policy from another dealer, or, I found a template online. Because at that point, you're not adapting it to your own needs. And at the end of the day, it's got to reflect you.
Right.
It can't reflect anybody else.
Yeah. One of the other things that was interesting kind of in this subject about business practices was we spent a little time, and of course I would urge everybody to go watch the full length thing. I think we went around 45 minutes on that full length tote to note thing. And we talked about driver's license as an example, like having an in-state driver's license is another example of business practice. And I remember you made the case that, people would have a legitimate business case for wanting that. So I think it's something we see dealers wrestling with. We see the questions out on social media, just like you do. And so I think people are trying to figure out what can I do? What is, sometimes it's more a question of business practice, like what's the smart thing for me to do for the sake of my portfolio. But sometimes it's also wrapped in what is appropriate from a compliance standpoint. So you can probably talk a little bit more about that part.
Well, you can't talk about underwriting without talking about the risk danger of any sort of discrimination claims.
Right.
You have your protected classes of individuals. You have the regulators are very concerned about any sort of redlining. So you have to look at those rules, and you have to make sure that whatever you're doing doesn't violate those rules.
Yeah.
That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah. There's a clip I wanted to play.
Yeah,
about
let the record
that.
show, Steve. We're barely 15 minutes in, and now the word discrimination has come up. Let's go ahead and play. We call it.
Don't assume you have to get in trouble for something else first, I guess.
And then I'll tell you that the CAC lawsuit that the CFPB brought, that the New York AG, Massachusetts has brought similar, that there's been a couple of other states that they're getting into underwriting because at the heart of it, they are looking for discrimination.
That's the third time I've heard that word.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we know that discrimination is part of what, I mean, obviously consistency solves a lot, right? I mean, when we're just super consistent about what we do, that's going to go a long way. And so I think when we get inconsistent, especially when it looks like we're favoring or discounting some group, then that tends to look like a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And so about 5 years ago, I had a client, and in their underwriting policy, they had a couple of different locations, and they put in a mileage radius, and it was based on their ability to service the accounts and what made them comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So it turns out that there was a military base about 10 miles outside of their radius, and sure enough, you had somebody complain, we think you did that because you're trying to avoid the military angle.
Huh.
And a lot of times the same question comes up in the parts of the country where there's Indian reservations, same type of analysis. So you've got to be careful when you set those radiuses, and you have to make sure that you're articulating why that radius is what you've chosen to stick to.
You actually brought up something that we've heard when we've gone around and talked to different dealers, and they're talking about who their customer is, and there is a military base close by, and it's really mixed feelings, and for some valid reasons. Why they're like, I really don't want to have people that are in active military buy a car, because there's just a vast array of things that could go wrong. And so how do you, like, in a case like that, I don't mean to squirrel, but in a case like that, how do you mitigate the risks that so many dealers are afraid of with, you mentioned a reservation or whatever it is that people are they're feeling a little bit uneasy about it, and usually it's because they've had bad experiences that they've attributed to this fact.
Well, and that's an area where compliance comes first over the business concern. You absolutely cannot redline. You cannot discriminate. You cannot say that okay, we're not going to do business with that particular class group or whatever. So you really have to put that first. And then you have to build the policy around that. And you have to say, okay, within those parameters, what are we able to do? I think when you're talking military, I think there's a big difference between, the service member that is already in the military and therefore isn't eligible for the 6% reduction. Versus the person that goes in the military later and wants that 6% reduction. I think that is what a lot of dealers are concerned about, and a lot of times they're misinformed. They think, oh, you're in the military, you're at 6%, and it's only SCRA only applies to those 6% reductions for folks that weren't in and then go in.
Right, it's good. You might explain. You used the word redline. What do you mean by that?
Basically, you pick whether it's a zip code, a neighborhood, or whatever, and it comes from the old red pen drawing the line around it, saying we're not going to do business there. You can't do that.
Okay, gotcha. Yep.
Gotcha. Well, and George from Arizona is like, is it legal to not lend to folks that live on a reservation due to the inability to repossess?
that would be an example of where you're going to get in trouble, because that is basically discriminating against that group. The whole repossession on a reservation, it's a fascinating subject. I have actually been to a reservation and literally sat with the tribal council and talked about repossessions on their lot.
Wow.
Because I was with a bank and we did several and got involved in a lawsuit and actually to settle the case had to go before the tribal council, and it all worked out great. I thought they were very reasonable, that they wanted us to use an operator that they approved on their reservation. But sometimes it does get to that level.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, when I hear that, I think it's interesting that and buy here, pay here, we're not banks that are regulated by the FDIC, right? So it's like, it's our money. Like if I'm the dealer listening to this, I think this is my money. Why can't I loan it the way that I want to? And in reality, that's because we're providing a service that is under the watch of these regulatory agencies, not to mention the civil side.
Oh, yeah.
There's a whole civil side of this.
Can we talk? There's another clip it's our last clip. So I want to play this because
I love these clips.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad. We had a lot of fun going through and it's like, oh, that's a good one. Hold on. Here it is.
I'll make a general statement. Back when I was doing defense work, I never handled a lawsuit that didn't start out as a complaint.
Yeah. Okay.
And the totality of my experience is if you give the customer a pathway to ventilate, then they're going to take that pathway.
Right.
Talk about what you mean by a pathway to ventilate.
Yeah, that's a way too artful way of saying it. So if you give the customers direction, if you're happy, wonderful. If you're not happy, tell us. And I cringe when I see dealers, complaints at soandso.com. It should always be feedback.
Yeah.
Tell us how we're doing at abcdealer.com. And whether it's positive feedback or negative feedback, it's still important feedback.
Uh-huh.
And you could learn from the negative.
I also picked up when you were talking about those pathways for actually communicating if you've got feedback, that feedback should be, someone should be watching for the feedback. Someone should be answering to the feedback, and hopefully someone that's not too emotionally attached to, or that can get angry about the feedback.
Or that doesn't have to always be right.
That doesn't always have to be. Now, I think that's what what it is.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't always have to be right. Yeah.
That is so important because a lot of times in working with dealers, I'll be talking to the person that has that responsibility, and they've never met a complaint that they thought was valid.
Right.
Mm.
And that's not practical. Of course, there are some that are valid. And so you really need somebody that's going to objectively look at what happened here and ask the question, could we have done better?
Yeah.
You may be completely right, but that doesn't mean that your communication was perfect. That doesn't mean that you articulated your position perfectly. So you have to, in a quest to get better, you've got to ask yourself some hard questions.
Right.
I like that. I really like that. That's one of the things that we, in our personal and our family and business and all of that, is that someone's perspective of how something played out is valid. Let's just stop. I mean, it's like that their experience is valid. We need to, that for me, it's like, okay, and recognize that their experience is valid. They may not have all the information. They may not have all of but from their perspective, that this is what happened.
Yeah.
And they, that's where the communication starts.
I'll tell you one that I'm seeing a lot these days.
Mm-hmm.
In the last year and a half, service facilities have really slowed down their ability to turn cars because of parts shortages and things like that. So I'm seeing a lot of complaints, BBB complaints, a couple of regulator complaints where the customers they're not getting the answers. So then they take the next level and they complain like, they've kept my car a month. Well, that complaint could have been avoided with good communication, explaining
Exactly.
we have ordered your part. Your part is on a 2-week delay. We will let you know as soon as it gets here, and then put on your calendar. You know, if you haven't communicated in 10 days, shoot an email, shoot a text, and just, you know, we're still waiting for it.
Right. And you know, it's what's interesting is at least from the dealers that we've worked with is for most of our buy here, pay here customers, 10 days is too long even to communicate.
They need the car every day.
They need the car every day. So even if it's like a quick touch every day, okay, we're still in the pipeline. I checked to see where the parts are. There has been nothing. I just wanted to check in with you and let you know that it's still, you know, we're still waiting. And those kind of quick calls can go so far. I mean, they have so much equity that you build with your customer if you have really open, frequent communication, especially around something like that, I think.
I think dealers need to appreciate the fact that the customer is not your adversary. Even if they're complaining, even if there's a tense situation, that they're not your adversary. You have to work together because you both have the same goal.
Yeah.
Right.
To keep them driving.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's something I see, like, as you guys were talking about that, I'm thinking about the one that makes me nervous is when I see dealers respond to reviews in a really argumentative way.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, wow, it's a missed opportunity to kind of diffuse, you know, an unhappy customer situation. And in the Toke the Note recording, Steve, I referred to the late Bill Maypother, the attorney who was, I primarily knew him through bankruptcy teachings, but he said in some course I attended that, you know, we should all be, as dealers, trying to avoid having our customers end up in an attorney's office, right? Yeah. We should try to avoid that. And I think there's so many opportunities. If we're really well plugged into our customers, we would have every opportunity to have a dialogue with them before it ever got to that place. And so that's what we're kind of always teaching. And when I heard Mr. Maypother say that years ago, like, I was coming from the retail business before I was ever in the car business. So I already sort of brought that attitude to things, and from a customer service standpoint, trying to, you know, resolve problems. And most times those are just results of miscommunication. So, you know, if we can improve communication, like what you're talking about, feedback at the dealership name, then we'll have a chance to talk to people and try to get those things resolved.
So if I could be so bold, one of the things I really like to see when I go on site of the dealership, I love to see a little banner, you know, tell us how we're doing, and then give them the email address. Don't bury it in small print in one of your documents in the closing package. Make sure everybody knows. Talk to them about it when you're doing the welcome call or interview, whatever it is. Talk to them about that.
Yeah. The other thing I used to do in a dealership that I managed that was in a different state, I used to have my phone number posted on the wall right by the payment counter. Like, they can always reach directly to the general manager. Here's my number. And so if there's ever a problem, we're just super transparent about that. We're here. Like, we're available to talk from our side. So if there's a problem, and by the way, I got very few calls because we were able to train our people to dissolve or to resolve problems at the dealership level. So, you know, that's part of what we would be striving to do. I got to ask you, and this looks like you're kind of queuing up the white hat way. I'll let you go into
Are
that.
you familiar with like what we've been teaching with the white hat way?
No.
Okay.
This is White Hat
This
Wednesday.
is White Hat Wednesday. And this is something that we've, and it's just been so fun to me where I'm listening to conversations that we're not a part of. And then someone says White Hat Way. And I'm like, yes. White Hat Way is something that is our foundational principles. And this is kind of our why, is to be able to create an environment where we can invite dealers into being White Hat Way dealers, which is fairness, consistency, kindness, honesty, compassion, empathy, character, transparency, goodwill, generosity, humility. And actually, I think it was George Spatty's like, that sounds like the Boy Scout.
Yeah.
But I mean, Jim's not a Boy Scout.
Yeah.
But it's when you approach your business through this lens of integrity and transparency and fairness and all of that, that it's as we work with different dealers and they say, what should my X be? We first off is like, how do you want to be known in your community? How do you want to be represent? How do you want to represent yourself? how do you want to be known in your community? Because it's, once you kind of put something through that filter of, which is what like our why, our guiding principle. And actually, for those of you who are new to listening to us, White Hat Way is the core to everything we do. Buy Here, Pay Your Nation Television, the Institute, Octane, these podcasts, Tote the Note, all of that is about encouraging dealers to embrace this kind of philosophy. So if you had a dealer that, was living those principles, that they may have a little bit of, I haven't written everything down yet exactly as I should, but they're living these specific principles of transparency and all those kind of things. And you have a
CFPB. I should have written that one down for her.
It's kind of bad. CFPB regulator show up, and they walk in and they see, if you have any problems, come and talk to, it's like, what we expect from you is make your payment on time. If you can't do that, please come and talk to us. What we expect from you is to keep your insurance active. If you can't do that, let us know, because we have other options. If what we expect from you is, if you are having a problem with your vehicle, that you would reach out to us and, let's see, and all of these things. And it's like, this is what we expect. And this is what what we'll give. If a regulator walked into an office or a dealership that had that kind of transparency, does that change the conversation at all?
So posting it on a wall, no, change the conversation. That they're going to want to dig into it, and they're going to want to make sure, are you really doing those things?
Okay.
You call it the white hat. At Ignite, we call it how to tell your story. I don't like to talk about compliance a lot of times, because that puts dealers to sleep. It's really how to tell your story. If I've got to defend you, and I grew up on this business defending dealers in lawsuits. If I've got to defend you, what story do I have to tell? That they're going to demonize you. They're going to say all these bad things about you. And then I've got to defend you. What story do I have to tell? So putting it on a board or a piece of paper, that's not enough, because they're going to want, they're going to want to understand, do you do complaint management? Do you practice what you preach? If you could show them that, yes, then I think it absolutely helps the conversation and softens the conversation.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered one of my questions in advance, but you sort of basically said, actions in that scenario are going to speak louder than words. Posters on the wall are nice, but if you're not following that practice, if your actions say something different, then that's a problem. I think you answered for me. I was just kind of contemplating, in a way, if I'm a dealer and I've got a complaint that's now escalated into something else, and you're having to defend me, then if my intent, across the board shows that we're trying to be an asset in our community, we're making every effort to communicate and take care of our customers, it's bound to help you as an attorney when this can be painted more as a single mistake, than an ongoing practice. Because if a regulator comes in and finds out it happened yesterday and it happened last week, and then that's not looking like a mistake.
That's exactly right. You want to be able to show that we've got the training in place, we've got the policies, we teach our people the right way, and if we had somebody drop the ball, that is isolated, it's not systematic. I tell dealers, don't fall in love with the idea of the bake sale or buying the Little League uniforms, or think that's being a good community servant.
Right.
There's a lot more to it than that. You actually have to be able to show that you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And that's probably a good place to wrap up. We didn't get it teed up before, but would you just tell our listeners your email address so I know how to find you directly?
You can always reach me at steve.levine@IgniteCP or info@IgniteCP.
Very good.
Excellent.
Not feedback.
Or complaints.
I'm sorry. The joke was just I had to grab it. So I also want to give a nod to Brent Carmichael, who was kind enough to join me as kind of co-moderating the conversation. And he had a ton to the conversation, obviously, with his experience. And so again, that Tote the Note full recording goes out at noon Eastern today.
On YouTube. And so let me throw this up there so that if you want to be able to find it, we will be doing a couple of social media posts to lead people to the YouTube channel, Jim Rhoads at the Octane Group.
Right.
You can also find any of our morning show podcasts and anything else that we have out there.
And just for your information, Steve, that's in a playlist. So once they get there, they can see the other Tote the Note things. But certainly the most recent release of the Tote the Note is this concept of, compliant underwriting. And Steve, I mentioned in the thing, and I want to mention again, I just see you and Richard at Ignite being so generous with knowledge. And I also see a genuine caring for success of the buy here, pay here dealer.
Yes.
And so we obviously share that, and we're glad to have you be part of the morning show today. And we thank you again for your contributions to the Tote the Note podcast.
I can't thank you guys enough. This has been a lot of fun. Like I said, it's a first for me. And if I make it to Howard Stern, I will certainly say that I got my start right here.
There you go. Love it. Yeah.
Hey, Steve, would you mind sticking around for just a second for after the show? And we just
You
want
bet.
to wrap up with you just personally, if that's okay.
Great.
All right. Thanks again, Steve. All right.
Good stuff.
Good stuff. Just another, we always want to put this up there, and it's been interesting. We've had a couple of people. It's like, oh, we finally had a way to reach out to you.
Yeah.
If there's anything that we can help you with, please feel free to reach out. You can call or text us at 903-816-0216, or you can also find us at the Octane.
And that's my
group.
cell phone. You can also just send me funny memes.
Yeah, he loves those,
Yeah,
especially if they're about cats or
Right.
children, one
Yeah.
of the two.
Whatever, fun.
He has a great time with those. Thank you so much for joining us on White Hat Wednesday. We're really looking forward to Friday with Jimmy Rambo. We're going to be talking about
Collateral
recovery
how to
rates.
calculate it and why it matters.
Yes, exactly. All right, guys, have yourself a great rest of your day, and we will see you on Friday.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Be
much.
ready.